Are they doing useful work? Or are they just papering over the problems of society? And we're going to start this discussion. There'll be a presenter who will present his views for 10 to 15 minutes. And then thereafter, we'll come to the studio audience. And then we'll go to our social media platforms and back to the presenter to answer questions and deal with opinions which will be expressed, both in the studio and then on our social media platforms. It is indeed my very great pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Comrade Badar Ibrahim. Comrade Badar Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Comrade Kwesi. Good evening to our viewers and good evening to our comrades and friends in the studio. In a world that is characterized by crisis, in a world that faces lots of challenges, severe inequality, high levels of poverty, you expect, some sort of organizations and some sort of institutions who will tend to want to change the system, some want to manage the system, and some want to present the system or preserve the system in the way it is. For the purposes of this discussion, I'll characterize this organization or institutions or agency or whatever you call them into three. One is those with the legitimate authority to actually effect changes, those who have the power and control, all the machinery to effect the change. That is the state apparatus. The other has to do with the, sort of the NGOs, the civil society organizations, even political parties in opposition and all those stuff. These people try to always bring alternative views to issues and try to present, certain issues in another perspective. However, they tend to maintain the existing status quo. They tend to preserve the capitalist system. And then the third group that I will call the progressive organizations like the Socialist Movement of Ghana and others who seeks to look at issues from a holistic perspective, taking into consideration the history of issues, the contradictions that exist within the various issues, as well as the politics around the issues. And so these three actors or these three groups all want to make a difference or all want to make changes. However, the first category or the first two categories seek to preserve the system. Okay, they seek to make changes or seek to reform the system the way in the current manner it is. Unlike progressive organization that seeks to, transform the entire system such that the entire system seeks to benefit the working people or seek to ensure equity and equality all over the world. And so if you look at issues around the gender question, for instance, progressive organizations look at it from a class perspective, from a holistic angle, from a historical angle, whilst, the liberal organizations seek to, look at it from, the surface, empowering one or two females, sponsoring one or two females to gain education and all sort of reformist approach. And so all these three institutions want to make changes. However, the first two, want to maintain the permanency of the existing status quo. And so today we are going to be talking about the second group of people, which is the NGOs and the civil society organization, sort of. Now, we need to understand the history of these NGOs and then civil society organization. It all started in 1913, where the United Nations federal tax system was introduced. Now, by 1917, these taxes or the law allowed for taxes to be paid to charitable organizations. So instead of corporations and individuals paying taxes to the government for redistribution of wealth in the bourgeois logic, the law allowed for incomes or taxes on incomes to be paid to charitable organizations. So people will accumulate wealth, accumulate all the surpluses, and instead of paying taxes and ensure that these taxes are redistributed to ensure equality and ensure that problems of the society are solved, it rather empowered these corporations and individuals to pay their taxes to charitable organizations. And these charitable organizations will do projects for few individuals, and at the end of the day, they are praised. And we see that a lot, A lot of people will be funded with taxpayers' monies, and all those stuff, and they will embark on a charity work, and then at the end of the day, we all come together and then praise them for doing charity work. Well, in essence, it is the same taxpayers' resources. In Ghana, we have them. There are certain corporations or state-owned corporations that have foundations, and these foundations will undertake developmental projects, or they will do some, project for various communities, some boreholes, some astroturf, and at the end of the day, everybody is applauding them. Meanwhile, it is as a result of the same taxpayers' resources that these projects are funded through. And then again, it is the responsibility of the system to provide these projects. However, the system has failed to provide these projects, but then the system uses these NGOs or these foundations to provide the system, and at the end of the day, these NGOs and foundations are praised. And so that was what happened in the 1917 in US. However, during both World Wars, both World War I and World War II, NGOs and civil society organizations played crucial roles. They played roles in, providing medical aids, providing military support, and doing operations which the U.S. government didn't want to be seen as doing. NGOs stepped in to be doing those kinds of operations during the World War I and then World War II. So it tells you that the NGOs and the aids they provide are not neutral. They have a position. And in both World War, you definitely have to have a position. Even if you are providing aids or medical supplies, you definitely provide the medical supply to one group of army. And so these aids are not neutral. They are highly political. But then, the NGOs in itself came to rise, especially in the Third World, between the 1980s to 1990s. And this was the same period where the Soviet Union had collapsed. And this was the same period the structural adjustment program and the economic recovery programs through the neoliberal framework were introduced mostly in the Third World countries. And so this was the same period NGOs rose into the system. Now, because the Soviet Union had collapsed, the ideological battle between socialism and capitalism seemed to have tilted towards, the favor of the capitalists. And all of us knows that the ideological battle continues, and then we believe that we must continue to dominate the battle of ideas. Because the capitalist society had some sort of leverage and decided to introduce the neoliberal and neocolonial policies through the SAP and the ERP. They needed a wing or an organ that will legitimize those policies. Remember, those policies came with severe austerity measures, severe difficulties, severe hardships. So they needed an organization that will legitimize the acts of the SAPs and the ERPs. And don't forget, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and so more or less like there wasn't an alternative for third world countries to seek support, ideological support, and all those stuff. During that same period, the CIA had become highly unpopular. And in 1979, that was where the students in Iran, stormed the U.S. embassy in Tehran and discovered a lot of classified documents and all those stuff. And so the CIA had become unpopular. So one is to get an organ that will legitimize the SAPs and the ERPs, and two, to get an organ that will perform the rules the CIA were performing, because the CIA had become unpopular. And that is how this NGO and then civil society organization came to rise between that same period. And so you had a lot of civil society organizations and think tanks who were actually justifying these SAPs and then ERPs. Of course, leaders like former President Rawlings signed up for it and introduced a lot of austerity measures that sold our factories and all those stuff. We also had leaders like Thomas Sankara, who actually died in this same month of October, actually rejected it. He paid the price, he died, but today we hail him. And it's very important that in the month of October we continue to hail Thomas Sankara for rejecting this neoliberal policies. This is how come NGOs came to rise. Again, these NGOs were providing, some sort of, or these NGOs and CSOs were providing some sort of intellectual, intellectual support for the neoliberal policies, and they were providing intelligence and information to these organizations. don't forget, the CIA had become unpopular, and so they needed something to do the work of the CIAs. Now, but then there are certain contradictions that exist in the NGO and civil society framework, which progressive organizations like the SMG must not adopt that particular approach. The first thing is that the CSOs and then the NGOs claim to be neutral, and that they are the third sector and that they don't have a position. All they care about is to advocate for reforms that seek to benefit the people. Whereas we know that neutrality in this capitalist world is complicity. For instance, the question on Palestine, when you are neutral about the question on Palestine, it means you are complicit of the genocide which perpetrated against the Palestinian people. Progressive organizations like SMG always have a position, and our position is with the working class. And so that neutrality question is a myth. And that is one of the contradictions that exists within the civil society and then the NGO space. And so we must be able to identify that line between them. I know there may be a lot of individuals who have genuine intentions of working in these NGOs and trying to make a difference. However, it is very important that we understand that there is no neutrality. Neutrality in certain circumstances tend to be complicity. And so if you actually want to make a difference, if you actually want to transform society, if you actually want to help people, you must take a position. And that position must be in the interest of what? The working class. Or that position must be in the interest of what? The oppressed. Again, these CSOs and the NGOs only undertake donor-driven projects. And so they undertake projects that will be funded by their donors. And so they do not care about what the actual needs of the society is. They do not care what the actual problems of the society is. They do not care what actually caused the problem the society is facing. All they care about is the interest of the donors. And the interest of the donors is actually skewed towards the political direction. So for instance, if an NGO sponsors a bill on land reforms and begins to organize sensitization campaigns around the bill, they will definitely tilt the minds of the people towards supporting the bill. And in this case, the bill may favor the interests of the elites. And so their focus isn't really on, developing or transforming society, but on donor-driven projects. I said it earlier that I know there are individuals who actually want to make a difference, who actually want to help society, who actually want to see a change. And they are working on these projects, but then their approach is quite questionable. And so progressive organizations like the Socialist Movement of Ghana must be clear that our interest is to transform society using scientific methods and not based on the projects that are being brought by donors. So for instance, on the issue around the environmental question, then NGOs will come, funding, let's advocate for green mining, green this, green that, and all those stuff. Meanwhile, the main problem is as a result of capitalist plunder. The fact that capitalists do not care about the consequences of the environment as far as they accumulate surplus. That is the main question around the. But then because NGOs and CSOs operate based on the interest of their donors, they tend to, they tend to manage these crises and try to appear to want to reform the system. Again, one problem around the CSOs and the NGO question is that they prioritize activism over theory. And so you have a campaign on, act now, a campaign on, let's do it now, and all those stuff. However, Lenin said, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. If you want to make a change, it doesn't just start by taking action and taking initiatives to solve the problem. You need to understand the problem. What is the root cause of the problem? What contradictions exist within the problem? Who benefits from the problem? You need to do all these assessments before you tend to what? Approach the problem and intend to solve the problem. But then these careful analysis are missing in the work of the CSOs and then the NGOs. Unlike progressive movements who think through the historical, issues affecting the society, or the historical issues that brought about the problems we face today. And so we must get that distinction very clearly. And so one of the things that you hear most of these CSOs and NGOs doing is, an action comes, then they begin to, for instance, the issue of galamsey. Oh no, let's look at it this way, let's ban this, let's change the law, let's do this, let's do this, let's do that. Forgetting that the main problem you have is because of capitalist plunder of our natural resources. The main problem is that no matter what, mining in whatever forms affects the environment. And we don't look at it from that perspective. Again, one thing about these NGOs and civil society organizations is that they seem to have a permanent presence. That is, they always have timelines, a fixed start, and then a fixed date for their projects. And you can't transform society with a fixed timeline. Transformation doesn't occur in a day, or doesn't occur within a specific time frame. And so when they are talking about the gender question, probably within a short period, in October, let's take October for instance, the issues around, breast cancer awareness and all those stuff. We look at it in October, we organize screenings and all those stuff. After October, the problem of breast cancer still exists. And they don't look at it from that angle. Today is Menstrual Hygiene Awareness Day. We organize forums, we provide sanitary pads and all those stuff. After the day, it's over. But then the struggle to liberate women continues. It's a permanent process until true liberation is achieved. And that is one of the challenges of the NGOs. And progressive organizations must understand the distinctions. When you talk about the healthcare challenges, we organize the most healthcare, blah, blah, blah. After that particular period, the challenges of healthcare exist. And so, these are some of the things that we must understand about the actions of these NGOs and civil society. Again, there's what I call the stakeholder myth, where the NGOs and CSOs think that the problems of our society is because there are a group of stakeholders who do not, agree. And so the only way to solve the problem is to bring on board all stakeholders, discuss the problem, and then provide a solution, which is a myth, which is false. That doesn't solve the problem. How many stakeholder engagement have you had on galamsey? Have you solved the problems of galamsey? How many stakeholders engagement have you had on even the violence or the violence that is happening in our society? Have you solved the problem? How many stakeholder engagement have you had on health issues, on poverty issues, even on wages of workers? We've had several stakeholder engagement, but it doesn't solve the problem. So we keep on having stakeholder engagement from one to another, to another, to another, to another. But it doesn't solve the problem. The problem of our society is simply a class question. It's a problem of the oppressor and the oppressed. It's a contradiction that exists between the oppressor and the oppressed, the slave master and the slave, the colonizer and the colonized. The capitalist and the worker. These are the problems of our society. And the contradictions that exist between these classes of the society is irreconcilable. So it is not sufficient to put together a group of people and say, let's have a consultative discussion or a consultative meeting to address a problem. It doesn't work that way. The only way you can address the problem is to ensure that the problem, or you address it in a way that will benefit the marginalized, or that will ensure that the marginalized is liberated. And so we must understand that, context. Again, these NGOs tend to attract a lot of funding and support from various organizations. But then if you trace the root source of their funding, the root source of their funding goes or comes from the same corporations, the capitalist elites, either corporations or the elites. They fund these NGOs. And of course, they say he who calls the piper pays the tune. And so if they are funding these NGOs, do we think they want to transform society such that society benefits the working people rather than the capitalist elites? Of course not. Also, they will continue to provide them funding and trying to water down those, trying to, calm the tensions down to ensure that people will not agitate and ensure transformation. And so the capitalist system remains permanent whilst they try to reform the problems, try to help few individuals instead of transforming the entire system such that everybody will be okay within the system. And so we must get that distinctions clear. Again, the other thing has to do with, provision of intelligence and information to various foreign intelligence agencies. Recently, Yemen discovered that CIA and Mossad agencies are tied with NGOs. So there were NGOs operating within Yemen who were providing intelligence and information to Mossad and the CIA, which becomes dangerous. And so in your minds, or in our minds, they are trying to help, they are trying to, bring about development and all those stuff. In the actual sense, they are providing information. They are providing intelligence to this foreign organization. And we know the role the CIA played in Ghana. Even if you don't remember anything there, 1966 coup. It's obvious, the evidences are there. And so some of these people try to, gather intelligence and feed the same people who brought us or who caused the problems of our society. And because of the kind of fundings they receive, some progressive organizations tend to even transform or transition into NGOs. And progressive organizations like the SMG must be very careful not to move towards that tangent. For instance, in Kenya, between the 1980s to 1990s, there was a group called Mwakenya. I hope I got the name right. This was a group that rooted a struggle in a class struggle. They were advocating for the dismantling of the capitalist system, advocating for Pan-Africanism, just as Kwame Nkrumah, Modibo Keita, and the other leaders spoke. That was their struggle. However, as time went on, they began getting funding from various agencies and what have you. And now the group that was fighting for socialism now began to fight for, reforms. They began to fight for multi-party democracy. They began to fight for, corruption-free governance. What are some of their terms? They began to fight for all those things, forgetting the anti-capitalism struggle that they were fighting for, forgetting the anti-imperialist struggle that they were fighting for, forgetting the Pan-Africanism that they were advocating for. And they transitioned into some of these NGOs and civil society organizations. And so they veered off their main focus, which was transforming the Kenyan society to a socialist society that benefited everybody. And then they now assume the permanency of the capitalist system whilst trying to advocate for mere reforms that seek to benefit only a few group of people. And so it's very important that progressive organizations take a cue from it and do not transition into that kind of organization. Again, one of the things that to make us understand that these NGOs and these civil societies are not not neutral, they are actually political. Because recently Donald Trump decided to cut aid to USAID and other NGOs around the world, even NGOs that dealt around the issues of healthcare. This is the United States government providing support, providing funding to this organization. And right after they cut funding, a lot of countries were affected. So does it mean that we must follow that model? Does it mean that if these fundings are not coming, there can be no transformation? Clearly, we do not need to follow this model. And after the action of Trump, a lot of agencies were affected. But does it mean that the struggle for a better society has ended? That should be no. And so if you are relying solely on this funding from the United States, you cannot transform society in that way or in that manner. I know there are a lot of people who set up foundations, who set up NGOs, charity organizations, some are individuals and all those stuff. But you need to understand that it is as a result of a historical process that gave birth to big NGOs and civil society. And that's because of that, or that particular, big NGOs and civil society gave birth to smaller ones. And so there are a lot of smaller ones who actually have genuine intentions to make a difference. But then they do not know how to make it. Or they are confused by the system. And so if you want to actually make a change, or if you want to actually make a difference, you need to join progressive organizations. You need to join organizations that sees the problem of our society as a holistic problem, that understands or that roots our struggles into history. That's the only way you can make a difference. But then, these petty NGOs, these petty foundations and all those, I know people have good intentions, but then there's a history behind it. And that history is as a result of, the same capitalist system that we have. And so in short, NGOs and civil society manage the symptoms of the problems that we face. They manage the symptoms of poverty, inequality, and all those stuff. They do not seek to transform it. They only manage it. They legitimize the neoliberal world, the neoliberal order. They tend to legitimize it rather than advocating for a dismantling of that particular order. And then they try to depoliticize the struggles. Our struggles are political. They try to depoliticize it and make it seem reformable. And so we need to build a strong working class movement. A strong movement of the oppressed class to actually struggle to dismantle the entire system. We need to ask ourselves, do we want a world where inequalities are merely managed, or we want a world that seeks to dismantle inequality? Do we want to build a movement that seeks to transform and manage the capitalist society, or we want a movement that seeks to dismantle the capitalist system? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. And I'll end by quoting Che Guevara, who was also murdered in the month of October, who said, "I am not a liberator. Liberators do not exist. People liberate themselves. NGOs do not liberate people. It is people that needs to come together to liberate themselves." Thank you very much.
Well, viewers and comrades, this is the presentation by Comrade Bada Ibrahim. It's now time to start the discussions, and I'd like to find out if there are people in the studio who have contributions or questions to make. There's some people in the studio who have questions and contributions to make. I see one, I see two, and I see three. So we go in this order, and then after that we'll go to our social media platforms. Comrade Victoria Wilson to start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Comrade Bada, for the insightful explanation. I think you've broke the issues down, and we are able to understand the role that NGOs play in our society, that they are not the immediate answer to the problems that the working people face in our society. And you are right about putting it in the class question, because if you are trying to manage, or if you are trying to solve the issues that the working class people of our country face without positioning it in that class question, then there is a flaw, because just as you said, it is a constant battle between the haves and have-nots, the oppressed and then the oppressor. One thing that I want to notice is that even these NGOs, you were talking about people, there might be people with clear intentions that would want to help and all that, but these NGOs, trust me, some are even, as in, they are more like exploitative. They get money from people, donors and all that, to fund their activities, and then the money that they get, or the funding that they get, is just some minute percentage that they might even use to help people. The rest goes to them. So it's also like a profit-making process, actually. So it is very important that we are discussing this, and this has come to our notice in this time, so that we know the clear distinction between NGOs and then progressive movements. NGOs are nowhere near progressive movements. They can't be near progressive movements because they have their own ideological thinking. And then I could say that most of them are for profit. So just the very system that we are fighting is what they are also trying to entrench or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, comrade, for that wonderful presentation and exposing the real intent of some of these so-called NGOs and SEOs, CSOs that we have in our society. They tend to be, especially the capitalists, they tend to sponsor these people so that they can also push for their own personal agenda and some of these their own personal projects. And actually, I think it's time for us to call out these capitalist elite in our society. They are what I would term environmental terrorists or financial terrorists. However, my question is, progressive societies like the socialist movement of Ghana, I don't tend to see much of what you do in a society in terms of creating equal opportunity, which is your objective, as I know. Perhaps there are projects or there are initiatives that they are doing, and the education is not going down well to some of us over here. So I would love to know what SMG as a progressive society or as a progressive movement is really doing to create an equal opportunity for the citizens, as you claim is your objective or one of your objectives in the society. Thank you.
Good evening, comrades and friends. I am Comrade Badak. Thank you very much for this presentation. We're talking about societies in our present political struggle. What I'm trying to say is that you are referring to, you are trying to compare NGO and then the organization that we have today, that is the socialist movement. Socialist movement is a different organization. It's a political organization altogether that is fighting to liberate the people. It's a class struggle organization that was formed. We started with the political socialist front, and then now it's a movement altogether. So if we are talking of civil societies or NGOs, NGOs have their own different the way they do their things. They can go to their the communities with their own agenda that they want to help these people, that they want to centralize these people. The people need medicine, they need schools, they need water in their localities. The NGOs, with what they have written to get the funding, they go to the communities and tell them that this is what they want to do. But sometimes they don't go deep in fighting the system. But here is the case: socialist movement take the government or the issues one by one. What is affecting the people? If the people are facing economic problems, the socialist movement come out with a statement to issue to the press and tell the government or the people that this is what the people want. So I don't want us to be thinking, saying that maybe the political social movement is not working, it's not in a direction. Now you've talked about the CIA that was funding, or maybe the CIA was behind the NGOs that were in the system. But we've forgotten that we've got so many charges springing up. Don't you know that also the CIA now is operating under the churches? Why then we have so many churches? Every Sunday, you can use somebody's bedroom as a church. What is happening there? That is part of the CIA working. Go to Bulgaria, you see the number of churches that they built there. Very big. Where did they get the money? You go to Accra and Kumasi, some big churches. Where do they get the money? It's part of the CIA working. That's where they get their information. So let us see our organization, our socialist movement organization, as a political organization that is trying to fight the system, that is trying to wage a class struggle against the elite who are in our society, who don't want us to penetrate through. We're enjoying and we're behind suffering. But one day, when we organize ourselves very well, we shall overcome. The problem is that organization is very difficult. But when we start to organize, the people cannot stand us. They will run away and leave us and we'll take over. Thank you so much.
Well, at this stage, we'd like to call Comrade Victoria Wilson to give us messages and questions from the social media platforms.
Good evening once again, comrades. I'll be taking some few messages from the discussions we've been having so far on the role of NGOs in Ghana. So these are some few messages that have come up. This person says, for some of the non-governmental organizations, the least said about them, the better. Some are just out to use human beings as money-making machines. This is Suleimana Abdul Rahim. This is from Unyeso Chidera Jessica, and she says, thank you, Comrade Bada, for your great presentation and clarity on the state of NGOs in Africa. It's quite unfortunate that NGOs in Africa have become money-driven and donor-dependent, serving the interests of capitalist and imperialist forces, rather than addressing issues from the grassroots or challenging the very systems that create inequality and class struggle. SMG, as a left-wing political movement, one of our core commitment is activism rooted. We strive to tackle social and economic issues from the grassroots. SMG is not an NGO, and we are intentional about not being seen or associated as one. And please, my question to you is, one, what kind of activists should SMG engage in without looking like an NGO? And two, can you help distinguish between the NGO activism and that of the left? So that is a question right there from Comrade Onyeso Chidera Jessica. This person says, I'm very enlightened about the lecture. Socialists seem to be the alternative. Can you give us a lecture on places in the world where socialism is being practiced and the effects to the population? This is from Baba Ali in Accra. This person says, a vital point. When NGO and social movements work in harmony, they can be an incredible engine for social progress through initiatives. I completely agree. It's inspiring to see how revolutionary organizations or progressive movements channel public passion into tangible action, driving our society forward in line with our socialist values. So this person says, Viva Socialism. Comrade Nafui here. Brilliant submission from Comrade Bada. Some NGOs use the initiative to exploit the vulnerable in the society. Oftentimes, the objective is to solve problem in the short term. However, revolutionary change is the way to go. As a progressive movement, SMG ought to continue to champion the interests of the working class to fight the canker of gradual exploitation in the name of social responsibility or help. Once again, that was from Comrade Nafui. This is from Catalyst. And he says, good evening, please, I need information on how to join the socialist movement of Ghana. Okay, we'll get in touch with you with that. And this person says, incredible and on point presentation from Comrade Bada. Thank you very much. I'll just take a few and I will be done. This person says, thank you, Comrade Bada. That's a very clear an important point about NGOs' role as against revolutionary works in our social development. This is from our regular regular audience, and then our regular commentator Edem Kwashi from East Legon, and he says, special greetings to my brother Ibrahim Bada. This young man is rising gradually and he is getting deeper understanding in the philosophies of Pan-Africanism and socialism. I am proud of him. In my opinion, any idea, an organization, any information, any knowledge that makes the black nation to always look to Europe, America, and beyond for external help is not good enough for our salvation. Who can deny the fact that most of these NGOs are here to help us believe in a heaven in the sky? In other words, we should always believe that Western solutions will help us. The enemy is so deep that it comes in the form of a friend trying to help, but not at the root of what they do is to uphold the idea of white supremacy. The Honorable Minister Louise Farrakhan will say, do we know the depth of this enemy? This enemy uses deceptive intelligence to rationalize evil. I send special greetings to everyone at Pan-African Television and to my beloved friend Mary McAfee Opariba Isaba. Okay. That's also coming from Edem Kwashi from East Legon. I'm reading this final one. This person says, good evening, Pan-African Television. Please, I would like to participate in the Wednesday Palaver. So what's the roadmap? Thank you. Okay, so all you have to do is walk in here on Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. and then you'll be part of the show. So this is all we have from our social media handles. Thank you very much.
Well, my pleasure to invite Comrade Ibrahim Bada to round up in 5 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. Very insightful comment and questions. Let me react to all the questions in this way. First of all, the problems we have in our society is not a moral question. It is not because there are lots of rich people who have refused to do charity. It is not because there are organizations who have refused to go and help people. The problem of our society is a class question. The problem of our society is carefully constructed through history. And the society has been designed in such a way that a group of people must remain oppressed, must remain poor to ensure that a few benefit and control the system. And that is the problem of our society. And so if you ask, what is SMG doing to provide equal opportunities and all those stuff? We are in a permanent struggle. We are in a permanent struggle to transform the system. And once we are able to transform the system, everybody benefits from the system. Everybody becomes, everybody is treated equal in the system. And there's a question around the socialist experiments in the world and all those stuff. I mean, go to Cuba. Go to Venezuela, they are experimenting socialism. And it's paying, good returns, even though they've been hit with several sanctions, several blockades, and we will continue to advocate for the world to lift the blockade on Cuba. We will continue to advocate, we will continue to, extend our solidarity to the people of Cuba, to the people of Venezuela. Little countries who are experimenting socialism, and it's paying returns, even though they've been hit heavily by sanctions and blockade. And so it's possible, it is happening, and it is possible. A world like that is possible. And it has happened before in the past. The Paris Commune was there, the Soviet Union, and all those experiments in the world. So it's possible. But then, what SMG is doing is to continuously wage the class struggle. So it is not for us to come and, sort of provide these kinds of opportunities, provide, these essential services. But it is for us to organize, to mobilize, and wage the struggle to dismantle the system and build a better society that ensures that everybody is catered for in the society. again, not just the NGO, the NGOs are not the only institutions which are being used to gather intelligence and which are being used to liberalize the system. Comrade Azuma made the point, the religious institutions, even the state institution itself, providing funding for our education ministry and all those stuff. Look at the recent curriculum that was brought. Have you asked who financed the change of curriculum and why the changes in the educational curriculum? All these are instruments and institutions that the intelligence agencies as well as the imperialist forces use to continue to liberalize our system and continue to gather intelligence from our system. And we must continue to wage the class struggle to be able to dismantle the system. Yes, it's very important that we see the fact that the SMG is not like an NGO. And that is why we are having this discussion, to make the point clear. And to get our members to understand that, look, our struggle is a class struggle. We seek to dismantle the entire system, not to reform the system or manage the system. And so, to answer the question around how can we do activism without looking like an NGO, is to constantly wage every struggle in a class perspective. Look at the issue from a class perspective. Look at how best we can dismantle the entire system, not just reform the system. And as we continue engaging in the struggle, as we continue, our development in the organization, we will continue to study, continue to understand issues, and continue to provide ideas and solutions that can ensure that we engage in activism without looking like the NGOs. And so I think I will end here and then urge everyone that, look, I know there are young people who want to set up foundation to want to make a difference and all those stuff. And there are people who are being used as victims, who are being, co-opted into various meetings and engagements by these NGOs and all those stuff. These are the people I'm referring to. These are just victims. They do not know what they are doing. And so if you actually want to make a difference, if you are genuine and you want to make a difference, join progressive organizations like the SMG. That is the only way you can make, a transformational change. That's the only way you can ensure that the system changes to benefit the masses and the entire population. Thank you very much.
Well, comrades, our time is up, and we'd like to say goodbye to you from all of us, from the director of the show, Sewa, from the producer, Makiza Latifa, and from all of us from the Accra Collective of the Socialist Movement of Ghana. We'll see you again next week. But until then, keep your dial on Pan-African Television, which brings you the best of analysis, best in news, best in current affairs, and everything. Bye-bye. See you soon.